Who here desires to be honored? Who among us desires credit for the serving or the sacrifice or the giving and generosity that we have done? I think we all do. When you give, it feels good to be honored. When you serve, it feels good to receive credit. When that is a natural, a normal, it is a human feeling. And Jesus says this: if you want to be great in the kingdom, if you wish to be great in the kingdom, you must become a servant. If you want to be great in the kingdom, he says, you must wash feet. And he said this in his great Sermon on the Mount. He says, and when you give, and when you pray, and when you serve, don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So that, he says, don't go to the street and advertise what you have done. Don't boast about it, but rather in humility serve quietly, he says, and your Father who sees that will reward you. And friends, and he says, if you do what you do for the praise of man, he said, that's all you're going to get. That is your reward. But when we serve well, he says, your Father will see you in secret and reward you. Because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. This morning, the seventh sermon from the book of Esther is entitled Honored Through Providence. And in Esther 5, we've gone through the first 5 chapters this morning. It's chapter 6. And in Esther 5, just a little recap. Esther, in chapter 4, has gone before the king, where Mordecai has discovered this plan that the king was planning to kill the Jews. And he says, Esther, you got to do something. Perhaps this is your time. Maybe this is why you are in this place in the palace. Don't think that you're going to escape. And she comes to this place of humility and finally says, I'll do it. And if I perish, I perish. So if it costs me my life, but I'm going to put it all out there, that's at the end of chapter 4. And so she begins in chapter 5 to make a plan of how to approach the king. And she gets dressed up and she goes in and she invites she invites King Ahasuerus and Haman to come to a feast. And she wants to present this to her. And Haman, he's the villain. He's the guy in the story that he's just so full of himself, and he comes away from this invitation saying, just look at me. He invites his friends over and talks with his wife, and he says, you wouldn't believe it. Look at all my wealth. Look at everything I've done. Look at what I have become. And you wouldn't believe it. Tomorrow I'm invited to a feast with the queen and the king. Only me, of all the people in the kingdom, they chose me. Just imagine this. Now, as he is leaving, after receiving that invitation, and he's heading toward his home, he sees the man he hates, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gates. And it robs him of everything. He says, but I'm going to this feast, and he literally says, chapter 5, he says, but as long as Mordecai sits there, how can I be happy? And they say, well, why don't you get rid of him? Build a gallows. And in Persia, it would have been a stake. You'll remember, they said, build a stake, a gallows, and have him put on it, impaled. And he's like, brilliant. Let's get at it. So throughout the night, they start building. And they build this thing 75 feet high. And Haman gets done, and he gets up early in the morning. This brings us to chapter 6. He gets up early in the morning, and he hurries to the palace to talk to the king about Mordecai and disposing of him. He has a plan. Chapter 6 has 4 scenes. The first one I've called Sleepless in Susa. The second one is a little pride in the palace. The third scene is honor and humility are coming together. Honor for one and humility for the other. And finally, Mordecai lives in security. Haman in shame. So the fourth scene, security and shame. I'll go through this chapter and make a few comments. Mainly, there are 2 points. The first one is simply a reminder that God is always working. God is always at work. There is nothing that has made him chew his nails and go, oh boy. There has never been an election. There has never been a world leader. There has never been something that he has trembled over and gone, I don't know how this one's going to work out. God is in control. But we only see one side of the coin. We only see what he allows. We don't see, when we get to heaven, it's possible that we will, no, we won't. We won't be worried about how things worked out on earth anymore. But we can imagine that we would maybe say, God, show me the real. Show me the real of my life. And over, you just might discover that, wow, and you protected me. And you held back that evil hand. And you kept me safe. See, we only see what he allows. Just recently, I don't know if I ever said, so the first point is that God is working always behind the scenes for the good of his people. Even when it looks like a tragedy for us, God is always working. And the second one is God exalts the humble. Verse 1, on the night when the king could not sleep. So just remember that Haman has built the gallows. So he's working through the night. And on that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the books of memorable deeds, the chronicles, and they were read to the king. Now, when you have a sleepless night, what do? We've tried all sorts of things. In fact, I found some really bizarre things that people have done over the years. And I think it was about the 1500s that they said if you wipe dog's earwax on your teeth, it'll help you to sleep. I didn't try. You try it. Later, it was fried lettuce. And there's all sorts of other things that people, we've counted sheep, and we have all these things that people have tried because they can't sleep. But the method tried and true, when you can't sleep, what do? Read. Not just anything. You read something boring, a history book. And so the king says, bring the book of chronicles, of memorable deeds, and read it to me. He was suffering from insomnia, and he was trying to sleep. And it just so happened, it was found written when Mordecai told Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. It just so happened they read of this account. That was in chapter 2. At the end of the chapter, Mordecai is at the king's gate. He hears of the 2 eunuchs talking, and they're planning to assassinate the king. And you know the account. Where Mordecai puts word to Esther and just says, you've got to tell the king, you save his life. Now, the Persian kings were known to lavish gifts on those who did something great in the kingdom. So they were known for this. And so when this was read to him, and by the way, scholars believe this is about 4 years later. So a lot has passed. And King Ahasuerus has had much wine. You will know that his life is sort of this long party, is what it feels like. And so he doesn't really recall this. And he also does not know that Mordecai is a Jew. That was never revealed to him. In chapter 3, where Haman comes to to the king. He just says, there is this certain group of people in the kingdom that are not obeying your laws, and they're not, and may I have your permission? If we killed them, we could have all of their money coming to the treasuries. He doesn't talk about Mordecai, the actual nemesis or reason for his hatred. And so it just so happened that 4 years later, the king can't sleep in his palace. He asks the servants to read, and they turn to this account. It just so happens, and he sits up in bed and says, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on this Mordecai man? What was done for? What did I do? What gifts did I give him? He was curious. He said, this guy saved my life. How did that happen? What was done? And this young man who attended him said, well, nothing. Nothing was done for him. Point one, when it feels like God is absent, he is always working behind the scenes on behalf of his people. God is not dead, we know that. God is always at work. Pardon me. And this, so throughout these 4 years, we know that the decree has gone out. We know that the Jews are going to be killed. Mordecai does not know that God is working on his behalf to save him. Imagine that. He doesn't know. He goes back to the king's gate, and he goes back to his workplace, and he goes back to his normal life, knowing that the 13th day of Adar is coming, the day when they will be killed. And he is simply saying something must be done, but he does not know what God is doing. You and I miss that sometimes, and I'm going to mention this just because it came to me recently. I don't think if I mentioned it before, then I forgot. Just this week. Okay, here's just I had a bit of a rough morning. You can imagine. One night, driving home, must have been, what day did it storm? Thursday? Wednesday? Thursday. All right, Thursday. So Wednesday was beautiful. I'm driving home in the evening, and I had a Zoom meeting at 5 o'clock that I almost forgot about. And so, but it's sunny, had the roof cracked open in the truck, and we had dentist appointments in the morning, Ty and I did, so that's important. And because there were these free toothbrushes that, well, I'll leave them in the truck, get them later. Ran into the house and had my meeting. That went till dinner time, and then we ate and chatted with the family, and then there were other things going on in the evening. And throughout the night, it rained and snowed. The next morning, for no particular reason, I got up earlier than normal. And we were short vehicles, and so I took Tom to work, and I showered earlier than normal, and I was ready for school, and I was thinking I should probably do some grading. Then I'm like, toothbrushes. I got to go get those toothbrushes. You can about imagine, if you know me at all, when I opened that truck door and there was a snowbank on the seat, things about came apart. You've got to be kidding me. Now, you might say, that's just such a small, insignificant thing. So, shop vac came out, vacuumed up snow, armor all the truck. It was clean. It's beautiful. I felt cared for, even in my frustration. Had I not come out until it's time for me to go to school, would have sat in a snowbank on the way to school. It would have I felt cared for, even in my frustration. Such a small thing, but I had this extra time that I didn't even know, I did not know why. Now, you might say, so insignificant. But to me it wasn't, I realize for most of you, you can probably swipe that snow out the door and drive, and it's no big deal. To me, it mattered, and I felt cared for by the Father who knew what was going on. And it reminded me of something on September 17. Not going to stay here because this week, of course, there was a tragedy that reminded me of, of course, brought up these feelings from my sister's accident as well. And I'm not going to talk there because right now it just doesn't make sense. I don't know what God is doing. It doesn't make sense. But I was reminded of something this week. On the night of Lucy's accident, Laura was cleaning church. We had a board meeting that was supposed to be at Bauman's cottage. When we got there, so there's two things. When we got there, we might say, there's still so many questions. Why would God allow Lucy's the tragedy? The battery was dead. We couldn't get into the cottage. The battery on the pad for the lock. And so we had the meeting at church where Laura was. Small detail, but it mattered to me. Secondly, at the Bauman's cottage, I don't have service. And so when Les called me, my phone probably may not have worked. Of course, God can make it work. I'm just looking at this going, minor details to most. Minor details that just so happened the battery was dead. Secondly, it allowed us to be here. So when I got the call, Laura and I were together. Minor details. God is always working behind the scenes. So to us, a frustration of a dead battery, perhaps there was something much bigger. And so for you and in your situations, God is always working. When he seems that it's just things are not working out, perhaps there is something that he is doing that we just don't see. And so Ahasuerus sits up in bed and says, "What did I do? Tell me, what gifts did I give to this man? How did I lavish my gifts on him?" And they said, "Nothing was done. Let's go on." So nothing was done. And the king says, and so now we are this conversation in the court, and the king hears something, and he says, "Who's in the court?" And Haman had just entered the outer court. It is now morning. He had just entered the outer court. It says at the end of chapter 5, he hurried to the palace because he needed to tell the king his plan. The gallows is built, 75-foot flagpole on which he's going to impale Mordecai. And he has this plan. He just needs to go get the king's permission, and we'll do away with Mordecai, get rid of that detail, and then we can go on. And Haman had entered the court. Who's in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court in the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows and that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Well, Haman is out there standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." Well, folks, God is always working. Let's remember, Mordecai does not know that God is working on his behalf right now. He does not know. All he knows is the 13th day of the month of Adar is coming. Friends, isn't that a parallel for you and me as well? There was a time in my life where I had no idea that God was saving me, that he was working on my behalf. That is how it is for every human. Some of us have come to that realization, and it says in Romans chapter 5, verse 6, while we were ignorant, while we were sinners, Jesus said, "I am going to provide salvation." While we were sinners, while we were ignorant, while we didn't have a clue what was going on, Jesus died for us. That is a great reversal. You and I deserve death. And working behind the scenes, God, while we were still weak, Christ died for us. Ahasuerus says, let him come in, bring him in. Verses 4 through 9. I think it's 6 through 9. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, and so it just so happens that Haman is here at this time. You see, the long list of coincidences that are just not coincidences. God is working behind the scenes. Haman just so happens to come when the Chronicles were read, and the king is wondering what was done. And it just so happens they read the account of Mordecai, and it just so happens that the king asked, what did they do? And it just so happens that Haman arrives on the scene, and it just so happens that the king says this, Haman, what should be done to the man? Think about that. He didn't say, Haman, what should we do to Mordecai? I heard he saved my life 4 years ago. He didn't say that. He said, Haman, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, who would the king delight to honor more than me? He was, his world was as big as himself. He just, of course it's me. And so Haman says to the king, and by the way, where Jesus says in Luke chapter, 6, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that's what's happening. This is what's in Haman's heart. And he says, king, for the man the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought. Not just any. Royal robes that the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden. Bring that. On whose head the royal crown is set. Honor him. Put the royal crown on, and the clothes of the king, and the horse that the king has ridden, and let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the most noble men in the kingdom, king. Just let him have a nobleman, a noble official, dress the man. And let them dress the man who the king delights to honor, and then lead him through the city. That would be honor. Proclaiming all along before him. Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. What a brilliant plan. Let's go on. Now, Haman is a proud man, obviously. This is really important. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. If you and I think that somehow we are better than the person sitting in front of us or behind us, or we're somehow better than our neighbors, we are missing the mark, dear friends. If you have it together more, if you think that you have it together more than someone else, you're missing the mark. Everyone, these are the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 14. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. In Philippians chapter 2, where we're called to humility, and in Philippians chapter 2, it says that every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus is the King. And so bow to him today. Friends, let's go on. So Haman says, this is how you should treat him. Put him on this horse. Lead him through the city. Let's go on. And the king says to Haman, yes! Brilliant! What a great idea! Hurry! Take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so. It's almost as if he's just, building this suspense. He didn't even know it because he didn't even know about the hatred between Mordecai and Haman. And he says, do it. This is a brilliant plan. And do so to Mordecai the Jew. Can you imagine Haman? What? Do it. I want you to do it. You're the noble official. That's great. You're the noble official. Get my horse. Get my robes. Put them on Mordecai the Jew. And then he says, leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Whew! What a reversal. Isn't it just what Jesus said? If you exalt yourself, you will be humbled. If you humble yourself, you'll be exalted. And so Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. Everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. Yesterday we had a business meeting here, and some people were slated for different positions at church. Not one position is more honorable than another. And what I've been reminded of is this. We say it's not about position, it's not. Perhaps your position is this. Feed the hungry. Be there for the homeless. Be there for the widows. Be there for the struggling. There is no title attached to it other than follower of Jesus. I just want to speak the name of Jesus. We sang that earlier. If you wish to be great in the kingdom, Jesus says, become a servant to all. Matthew chapter 20. If you want to be great, it's the great irony of the kingdom. It is upside down. It is backwards. If you want to be great, become the least. If you want to be exalted, be humble. And so Haman, he leads Mordecai through the city. Let's go to the final verses of chapter 6. And Mordecai returns to the king's gate. He just goes back to, we don't read of any gloating. Mordecai must have had a smile on the inside, I think. Mordecai must have just thought, I don't get it. See, Mordecai does not know what God is doing. He doesn't recognize it yet. He doesn't know that this is part of the plan of the great reversal of he doesn't even know that there is a gallows prepared for him. Mordecai, here's the crazy part. Mordecai did not know what was going on. King Ahasuerus did not know what was going on. Queen Esther did not know what was going on. You and I, many times, just do not see what is actually going on. And so we're left with the tragedies. We're left with the pain. We're left with the confusion and the brokenness. Mordecai, Esther, the king, Haman thought he knew what was going on, and it turns out he didn't have a clue what was going on. Mordecai goes back to the king's gate, to his normal place. Haman pulls the hood up over his head. He hurries. It says that he hurries home mourning. Can you imagine? Surely, he hurries, he's mourning, he covers his head, and he tells his wife Zeresh and his friends everything that happened, how he was humiliated. And his wise men and his wife Zeresh say to him, and I am certain they didn't have a clue what this meant. But somehow they said this, Haman, if Mordecai, before whom you've begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. How could they know what that meant? Haman is humiliated. He is abased. He is shamed. He had elevated himself. He had puffed himself up, and he was brought down. You see, those who stand in opposition to God, and we live in a place where many are in opposition of God. They shake their fists at him. They ignore his teachings. Many people in the world. they not only stand in opposition, they curse God. And think about it this way. At one day they will fall before him. One day. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, if the one you are opposing is God, I urge you to come to him. He is your hope. Mordecai is the hope of the nation, but he doesn't even know it. God is our hope. He is our refuge. He is our strength. And he has not forgotten you. He has not forgotten his promises. He has not forgotten your situation. You are not overlooked. We feel that sometimes. Mordecai must have felt overlooked. Captives in Babylon, or in Susa, I guess, here in the Persian Empire. But God has not forgotten you. 1 Peter chapter 3, I believe, verses maybe 9 and 10. For the Lord is not slow to keep his promises, as some think slowness. When it doesn't happen immediately, we think, God, what are you doing? Or when it doesn't happen in a long time. God has not forgotten you. Mordecai returns to his place. And while they were talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived. They hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. And so the king and Haman went to the feast with Esther. And the king has no idea. He has no idea how humiliated Haman was. He has no idea what was actually going on, because two things. God is always at work. God is never asleep. In the 121st Psalm, I believe it is, it says, God who watches over you is never slumbering. He is always awake. He who keeps Israel does not sleep nor slumber. When it feels like God is absent, we must focus on what we know, not on what we feel. We look for what we can't see, because what we can't see is reality many times. He is always working behind the scenes on behalf of his people. And finally, everyone, if you want to be great, you must become a servant of all. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Friends, sometimes it doesn't make sense. We must rest in the reality that his ways and thoughts are higher than ours, Isaiah 55. And so we focus and trust and believe and place our hope and confidence in who we know he is and not on what we feel. May God bless you all as you continue to walk in his way and as you place your trust in the one who is awake. God bless you.